takeaway is I want to be able to talk about the trends, where they've come from, where they're going, any complexities and concerns that those that are part of the great divorce are having. In addition to those of us, how do we solve those? What are the solutions? What are the unique challenges that they're facing? And really, how do we help them? Because over time, what we're actually going to see is we are going to be the front runner to be able to help these, because a lot of legal counsel, they're busy learning the law. We need to be busy in our own skill set and what we have to draw and be able to help out the team of the counsel. As we talk about it, I like to call it untying the silver knot. Sometimes you hear it called the silver splitters. There are very specific dynamics that are out there for this particular segment. We all know Zsa Zsa Gabor. We all know her history. So kind of found this quote. I think a lot of our clients can relate to this, as a lot of people want to keep the house. In her case, she wanted to keep the mansion. So I want to talk about the trends. So the trends as we've seen them, really, divorce has been declining for quite some period of time. But ultimately, that particular segment of the great divorce, it is the largest growing trend. But there's other things that are going on as a practitioner we need to be aware of. One is that couples are they're living together rather than getting married. And why do we care about that? Is as this particular segment is growing and couples are living together, obviously there's not going to be as many marriages for us to be able to handle. What we are going to see are those that are living together, they're creating assets, and we're going to have to help in that realm. Case law will come about that's going to preside and decide what will happen as those that don't get married but live together for 10 years and have assets as if they're married. How is that going to affect our particular practice? So we need to be aware that a lot of couples are just living together and understand why they're doing it. A lot of them, they are delaying getting married, if they ever do, for career, and those that aren't are just enjoying their career and their free time. This is also the Generation Z, that their children are pets, their children are dogs. That's why you're seeing the dog parks, the dog restaurants. You're seeing all of them pop up. And really, these pets are really giving more influence over their life than even what some of the kids may be. Not dynamic. Those that are getting married at a later age. So they're creating two things. One is, again, their careers are developing. So when they do get married, they have more complex assets that they're bringing into the marriage. Other is they are doing it at a later date, which may actually reduce their ability to have children, or if they are, they may have one child at all. So it's going to create a future domino effect in marriage and in the next generations in the family dynamic. Previously, we all know women would marry for financial reasons. This would have been your 50s and 60s, 70s, which are now filtering into the great divorce. We're marrying because they didn't have a skill set. They didn't have education. Where now, there's not a stigma anymore the way there used to be. And now 66% of women are filing divorce, and 90% of those women that are filing are educated women. So that entire dynamic is changing. This actually leads into the great divorce, which party that's filing is women. The one who's filing the most of the great divorce are women, because they're now becoming empowered as they go. So as we talk about it throughout this presentation, find that really predominantly women are filing. They're filing because their attitudes are different, their thought process is different, and overall, these women want a higher quality of life and happiness they hadn't had over the course of their marriage up to now. So our profile of the great divorce, and it's anyone who's over 50. That's where it begins. And if we know anything about the 50-year-old generation, they are part of the baby boomer or the lesser end of the baby boomers. They have already started a career. They are probably CEOs. They are probably business owners. They've been married for likely 20, 25 years. So knowing that, you're already thinking about in your mind of assets. There's complex assets. There's business owners. There's high income. There are likely 2 to 3 children that have been out there of the marriage, and it's been a long-term marriage. Statistic-wise, 50 years ago, it was almost unheard of that those that were over 50 were getting married. Only about 3% of them were. Go ahead and cut that in half. 15 years ago, now you're probably about 25%. Go ahead and fast forward to now, about a third of the marriages being filed are over 50. They're your gray divorce. And predictors, because of the trend that's gone on, that number is going to triple by 2030. I ask you as a practitioner of what are you doing to understand the dynamics of what are about to hit your front door? As a practitioner, how do you serve those clients? Because it's a very different mindset psychologically, financially, than what we've been accustomed to with some of the other type divorces crossing our plates, if you will, over the years. There's a lot of actual factors that are contributing to the gray divorce. Here's just some of them. So the largest is going to be empty nest syndrome. Not familiar with what that is? That is going to be a segment of the population where you're going to be between about 50, 55, 60 years old, where all the children have now left for college or have moved out. So now the parties are left by themselves. They likely have poured so much into their raising of their families that they've neglected their marriage. They've neglected intimacy, neglected communication, and now here they sit together and they're not really sure what to do. So as this perpetuates in this empty nest syndrome, one or both parties will begin to have sadness or loss or distress, realizing all the children are gone and they're left by themselves. This can be challenging. This can just really help them reflect and see what has happened over the years. And usually for one party or the other, this is where a midlife crisis takes place, traditionally for the husband, where affairs will begin. They're going out to look for respect or intimacy, been declining, if it even exists at all, once this empty nest syndrome begins. You can already tell the empty nest syndrome perpetuates a lot of issues feeding into this gray divorce of this particular age group segment. Retirement adjustment, potentially, some of the, either one or two of the parties have already hit retirement or they're considering retirement. Once they hit that retirement, and same thing, they kind of look at each other and go, now what do we do? The husband might just want to go play golf every day. The wife may want to go ahead and be with the husband because she hasn't seen him for years while he was building a career. So this retirement adjustment could be a very bittersweet thing as well, because they really have not spent the time together, and now they're being forced to just for the fact that they're together. Lack of spontaneity. I mean, think about it even in our own lives. Sometimes we're not as spontaneous as we used to be, and as we go ahead and maybe get out of a mundane 20, 30-year career, maybe we don't want to be as spontaneous because we're tired and we just want to kind of focus on ourselves. There's no spontaneity in a marriage that may have taken place 20 years, 25 years prior. Financial disagreements are going to start to arrive. As you perpetuate again out of this empty nest syndrome, perpetuate into retirement, now we're going ahead and going on to, we have one fixed income that we're living of just a bulk of assets that we're living off. And there may be disagreements of how that's being spent. Prior, possibly, the husband was working and he was the one handling finances and the wife had not. She was the homemaker. She was taking care of the kids. Now that there's just one income, there might be more voice by the wife, and the husband may actually not feel the same way because now he's not earning an income. There's no paycheck. There might be a lot of disagreements how the money is being spent between them. If they want to buy a motorhome and travel because now they're in retirement. That's always understanding what is the dynamic that's happening between them. And we also have to think about that particular age group from 50 to 60. How are they spending today, even as a marital couple? And couple it with a retirement or getting into the empty nest syndrome for divorce, that's changing the dynamic of their communication, possibly even their trust. They're going to change as they are and likely make a lot of strife, which then leads to potential mental and physical health issues. What's going on? Ultimately, they're going to have a desire for some increased happiness because they're leading into now this segment of their lives where they're not happy. They want fulfillment, and they're going to leave and they're going to go find it. Where they always find that they're growing apart. So ultimately, what had already taken place, possibly for 20, 25 years, will come to light upon retirement, approaching retirement, or once the last child have left the nest, so to speak. All these issues are now going to come into play. A lot of complexities in the gray divorce that may not exist in prior years. About it, the CEOs of the world that come in, maybe they have changed jobs over the years, have a golden handcuff, whether it be something called RSUs, restricted stock units, or deferred compensation.
No, I just got on a Zoom call. I was late to get on.
Can we mute everyone?
Yeah,
Please?
everybody mute.
Thank you.
Yep.
So again, you may have a deferred compensation, which are going to be a special type of payment to one or more of the parties. In addition to the larger retirement accounts that we're used to seeing, 401ks, your 403bs, your 457s, those are still going to be out there, but the complexities are going to come over the years because corporate structure has changed, and corporations need to keep those that are special decision makers and that they have strategy that they lead to the corporation. They want to keep them. And now as practitioners, we have to figure out, what do those assets mean? What do they look like? And possibly, is the other spouse even entitled to any of them? Pensions are going to change. And we'll talk about this a little later, but depending on the age of the parties and if they're currently still working or they're in retirement, they could be in something called pay status, which means they've already started receiving their pension. The problem on one side. Two reasons. One, if they made a choice of what they call a single pay life, that's one issue. The other issue is this pension going to be figured into support payments? Depending on your jurisdiction and state, it may. Family business is a very large issue, and I find is one of the largest complexities that are facing the great divorce. For a couple of reasons. One, as we know through the generations, the old grandmas pass it to mom and pop, and now pass it to those of us that are getting divorced today, the ones that we are actually facing, the ones that we're assisting and are on the divorce team with. There's a multi-generational family business. Either our parties, our husband or our wife or both, may have bought into the business. Possibly they were gifted shares of the business. This needs to be untangled. And this is something that as practitioners, we're pulled in all the time. How do we help understand the assets of the parties? This family business could be a multi-layer asset. It could also be a multi-layer inherited asset, which brings its own complexities. Alimony and spousal support, depending on their age and depending on where they are in retirement, this could have a lot of complexities of how is one going to live if they're both already on their fixed income. What will a jurisdiction or a judge do if they have to make a decision for? And if we're settling outside of the courtroom, what type of parameters do we have to work with? Another complexity is financial care costs. And we know as practitioners, and I could say probably across the board, that all of us experience the pain of healthcare costs, whether it's premium or whether it's out-of-pocket cost, we feel it. And we're at the point of in our working stage. If someone's getting divorced, there's a lot of choices to be made of how are they going to get health care benefits. The retiree, possibly the husband, usually the husband, they already have it set up through the corporation of what they're going to receive. The outspouse wife may not have a clue how she's going to afford health insurance. And if there's a gap between her age and 65 until Medicare, how is it going to be paid for? Fluctuating, if you're not getting enough support because there's not enough income to go around, how are you going to pay your bills? So these 6 are the largest complexities. Estate planning will actually encompass in the very end overall, because at this point, the husband and wife likely have already made an estate plan, already planned for their children, already planned for who's going to be the power of attorney of financial and health care. This is actually one item that the gray divorce neglects to do. While it's not complex on the outset and in the overview, this is often forgot about. And when something goes on, they forget that the spouse they've had for 20, 25, 30 years is in charge of their health. They're in charge of their finances because someone didn't actually change the documents as they needed to do. As kind of alluded to before, there's a lot of complexities. So I want to talk about inheritance first. Those of us that have been in the financial industry for some time have watched what we call the silent generation transfer a large amount of wealth to the baby boomer generation to the tune of trillions of dollars. And when I say trillions, I mean about 2.8 trillion, and over the next decade, the baby boomers are going to have close to $68 trillion. It's pretty massive. So those of us that are practitioners that are in the financial industry, we need to know, where do we come into play? Because inheritance has been commingled over the years just based on the nature and the culture that this particular generation has lived in. And it's morphed into marital accounts. So here's what I mean by that. If a grandparent or a parent left some money to either husband or wife, typically what they did is they combined it into a marital account. They added the other spouse's name because that's just what they've done all of their years of marriage. Now, getting divorced. One spouse or the other says, well, that's mine. Mom left me that. Dad left me that. Sometimes these couples don't have proof. They didn't keep records from 10 years ago. Records aren't even available, but one is saying to the other, that's mine. So how do you pull it apart? Well, it depends. First, you have to have burden of proof of what are we looking at? Where did the numbers start? Where did it come from? And that's where tracing and forensics can come into play. Other times, maybe they do have a document and they show that $50,000 went into the bank account. Then it becomes from a different tracing aspect of how was it spent? Where did it go? Did it pay for a vacation and a remodel? Or did it maybe go into the account and then buy another asset of a stock or a bond or something else that might still be fully intact? Be able to pull apart the inherited assets and see what is marital and what's not. Sometimes you can't. Business aspect, as we discussed earlier, we need to go and trace what happened inside of the business that one of the spouses work at, either from a receipt of a gift, possibly even non-marital prior to the marriage, or maybe it was a marital asset where one spouse actually bought into the company with marital income to create that asset. We need to go back and see what agreements were put in place, what type of funds were exchanged, and what actually happened from point A to point B. Somewhat create a timeline of when was an asset inherited, gifted, or received, what happened throughout the marriage, and what's happening at that moment in time. We also need to consider, with assets in retirement, of tax implications. We all know assets grow over time. If someone purchased an asset 20 years ago, and it's really at what we call the cost basis, or the principal, for lack of a better term, we bought an asset for $10 a share, and now it's worth $250. There's a huge taxable gain between that two, depending on the party, depending on their income going forward. That may actually lend to who's going to receive that asset and who's not. It may not be a split down the middle. It may be where one party needs to take that asset and another party needs to take something else. Tax implications come into play in long-term marriages depending on what they've done in their past. Other thing to consider is that particular generation, they were part of the pension era. They had a lot of corporations they worked for that had the old traditional defined pensions. So if those are going to be paid out, that could be, as we said, either an asset or they could already be in pay status and it could actually be income. They're also likely going to have the old traditional 401ks that they save for. They probably have old traditional IRAs out there that are going to be taxable dollar for dollar. Pensions taxable dollar for dollar. Social Security, more than likely, they're going to be taxed on 85% of that income. So if we look at it from a high-level picture of what asset should a party take, it depends. What's the overall picture? What's the income? What's the asset? What are the needs? And what's available? all those considerations into play, not just looking at here's an asset A, here's an asset B, unless it's a very simplified type marriage. No matter what, overall, there's going to be less time for financial recovery. We can all do the math. Even if we're splitting assets 50-50, likely the husband's going to be receiving more income, even in the form of Social Security, than the wife would be. We know that one party's going to have less time to financially recover, recoup, and restore the net wealth that they had prior to any of those divisions. And spousal support payments, as we look at it, most jurisdictions have formulas or they have parameters for payment of alimony and support payments. We'll talk about this here more in a minute, but the takeaway is depending on the spouse, depending on the income, depending on what's available for support payment, if at all. Less and less awards of support. I'm seeing it more often as those that are settling outside of court. They can think outside the box. They can look at everything from an overall comprehensive picture and decide together what they want to do. A lot less judges award. So the other thing I'm seeing for those that have awarded support, modifications are coming up. Not sure what a modification is. If 5 years ago a judge awarded permanent support to one spouse, then the person who's paying is about to retire. They go back to court and they ask the courts to please consider a modification of what they were being paid on various factors. Of course, that factor typically is, I'm retiring. I'm not making as much money. Can we please change my support figure? And courts will allow this, either in the realm of a lowered support or none at all. I actually had a case that was a permanent maintenance case. He retired. He actually was making half of what he was making prior, but his assets had accumulated under 59.5, so he couldn't access those assets. The judge is still making him pay $1 at this point in time with modification into the future. So even though something may have been awarded previously, if there's a change of circumstance that's substantial, the judge can likely change that particular support award. And during these times of the complex assets, the other thing I see a lot of is something called financial infidelity. So that is something where someone who's been married for 20, 25, 30 years, they know their spouse. They know how they tick. They know how they work. The other spouse may begin to be secretive. They may do some purposeful acts of spending money, whether it be gambling or an affair. They likely will have some stashed accounts. They may even incur some debt that the other spouse doesn't know about. It could be in the form of buying an asset. It could be in the form of a home equity line of credit that potentially the other spouse didn't know about because they didn't have to sign for it. This just creates a vulnerable spot of a dishonest spouse. Practitioners, as we look at the clients coming in our door, and it's those that are of the age group of 50 or older, we just need to be aware that those assets are likely more complex. A lot of tax implications that could harm them if we don't look into the asset itself. That particular generation, as they divide the assets, they don't have the time to recover. Just like market recovery, it's the same thought process, the same idea. We also need to be aware that this is the generation that won't have enough income for two homes, depending on their circumstances. And overall, I'm seeing more financial infidelity in this age group than I am in any other age group. I'm pulled into a lot of cases to do a lot of tracings for them, just what I've just described there. So I've touched a little bit on the alimony and support issues. I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into that. So as retirement commences, we all know that there's going to be less money to go around. We have a fixed income. We don't have the opportunity to make more. I've had cases where the divorce is pending and one spouse says, that's it, I'm going to retire. Sometimes it's because their body is worn out or they're at the age of retirement, early 60s, mid 60s. Other times it's out of spite, where they want to go ahead and retire so they don't have to pay support to the other spouse. Know that depending on your jurisdiction, depending on your state, that may or may not fly. Judges typically know when someone's trying to be underhanded, and they don't have the tolerance for it. So they're going to make them pay support, where if they want to go ahead and retire, they can, but the judge is going to tell them figure out how to pay the support payment. They don't have the tolerance for them to try to play the game. But that's one end of retirement commencement that is going to appear in the gray divorce that may not appear in other younger divorces. Other issue on the other side of the coin is if someone is at retirement age, a judge is not going to be able to force them to work beyond full retirement age. So spousal support is going to be minimal, if at all, in those type of cases. So outside the box thinking needs to take place to be able to allow someone to pay their bills, make sure they can start anew. Retirement commences and they're in pay status and there's not enough money to go around. That's all there is. They can't be forced to. For other times in a marriage, one party may continue to work to make sure health insurance is there or there is enough payment for bills. I'm also seeing something called, again, long-term support not being forced. Previous years, those of us who have been practicing for some time, permanent support for anyone who is married over 20 years was almost the standard. Yet often. As years progresses, case law and laws change, we're seeing less and less long-term support ordered. And we all know that the divorce can't divide entitlements like Social Security. So sometimes that's all they have is a Social Security payment, potentially a pension payment, and a payment out of a retirement account. It's what they call, it's not a maintenance case, not a support case. Not enough income to go around that each party needs what they have. And at other times, the person who has less income through Social Security, they might get a little bit more of the assets, so what they call an offset, or just 5. When we have these type of spousal support issues, if there's not enough money to go around, a spouse may receive more than 50% of the assets. So pension payouts. If you're not familiar with how pension works, there are different types of pensions out there, and each one are governed by plan documents of what's been on the corporation. It actually have very detailed information of whether it's a shared or separate benefit. That means to you as a takeaway, are they sharing out of a pool, or is it a separate benefit that the day of the divorce it's put aside for them? Spouse is still working. Know that that particular spouse, their pension is now their part plus any earnings. Ex-spouse doesn't get a piece of those earnings. They only get a piece of it until the date of divorce. It becomes a very separate bucket in any way, shape, or form. Some pensions require the spouse to retire prior to ex-spouse receiving any income. Remember I said there's spitefulness? Some spouses will continue to work until they literally physically just can't anymore because they don't want the other spouse to receive the pension that they've been entitled to during the divorce. Other pensions, doesn't matter if the other spouse is retired or not, they can go ahead and claim it. So I have one right now that's 55. The other spouse is 60. Still working. She can go ahead and claim it at 55 because the plan allows her to do so. I have another that they are currently still working in their mid-60s. The spouse is actually the same age, and they cannot draw this pension until the employee retires. But we just have to know that trying to divide assets for the gray divorce, they're part of that pension heir where likely there's a pension in place. We have to understand how that pension works. How will it affect both parties? How will it affect their income today? In the future, when can they claim it? Because our clients want to know that, and that's our due diligence to find that out in the plan documents. Overall, these issues are going to affect the standard of living. They're going to standard of living for both spouses, but women have a decline of 45% of income after a divorce. That's a pretty huge hit. Biggest expense to them are going to be health insurance and housing. They are not old enough for Medicare. Now they have to find a way to afford a pretty hefty premium, and likely they're only receiving maybe half Social Security if they're 62 and can claim it, or they're receiving a very small pension payout, assuming that pension can pay out early, and possibly what they're living on or any assets they received. If they don't have one of those three, they've gone back to work with minimal or no skill set to be earned maybe a minimum wage or a $15 or a $20 an hour job, only skills they may have qualified for. Big issue more for women than men. It's going to be health insurance. How do we afford it? How do we pay for it? Lend into housing. Don't have two incomes in one house, or you have just one income in one house. Now we're going to split it into two. Really, there's going to be less money to go around. The standard of living is going to change for both parties. They're trying to find housing. They likely have to either sell the family home. They have to live in that family home for a period of time until it sells, and then they have to figure out where they're living next. Do they rent or do they buy? If you've been the working spouse and you have a longer credit history and you have potentially higher income coming in, you're more likely to qualify for that new mortgage. The other spouse who didn't work, who doesn't have an income stream, it's going to be a challenge of how are they going to qualify for a home mortgage. They may likely have to rent, which we all know may as much as a mortgage payment, if not more, in today's marketplace. So the unique complexities of two household incomes. Sometimes, if one doesn't have enough money to go around, they're going to create debt. This is going to create credit card debt. This is going to create home equity line of credit debt if they have a home. So it's going to end up imploding both parties, or even one of the parties, just so they can afford to live in a halfway lifestyle of what they were used to. Status, the one thing to and look at is, we discussed earlier how to get into that pay status, but what we didn't talk about is how to actually tell the company one party receives some of the pension and then what happens after they're already in pay status during a divorce. It is a special document that if a party is going to receive a pension payout or a percentage of, someone has to make the plan or the plan administrator aware that someone's going to be receiving this. Typically, this document is called a quadro. Depending on if they're a teacher or if they had a 457 or a government official, it has a different name. But there is some document prepared at the time of divorce finality that needs to be sent to the plan administrator. So many times I am finding in the great divorce that no one is finding out about how do the pensions work, as we discussed earlier, but more importantly, did they do it at all? There's a lot of times where those that are coming into a divorce that may have been in the past couple of years, the past 5 years, no one filed this document. Now, as a practitioner, we're being pulled in to calculate something that should have been done 5 or 7 years ago, should have been on file that long ago, so that when it's time for a payout of this pension, that it's all ready to go. So again, the takeaway is, if you're dealing in the divorce financial industry, have clients that have a pension, even retirement benefits that are traditional from a 401k or 403b, make sure those documents get on file. Make sure that your client has their entitled portion, percentage, amount put in their name. It just creates headache and expense down the road if we don't. Another issue with gray is some of these individuals that are ready pay status or receiving their funds, they may have already elected their payout. And here's what I mean by that. Whenever you elect a pension pay status, you tell that company, how am I going to receive that amount of money for my entire life, or how am I going to receive it for a period of time? So not to get too deep in the weeds, but they sometimes call it single life pay, joint life pay, period certain. So one being, it pays out for your entire life. Joint, it pays out for both parties' lives at some percentage. And period certain, it only pays out for a certain period of time. Each one of those amounts they receive are different. If someone would have chosen, for example, joint life, that is the lowest payment of the three. They're already in pay status. If you're going through a divorce and you're already in joint pay status, Well, that amount's going to be a much lower amount going forward, and that joint pay status is going to come into play upon death. So we need to know if they're in pay status, if someone's already receiving that payment, in other words, based on what they elected, how does that affect the other spouse? Is there going to be a point in time where if they elected a single pay and the person who was the employee passes away, does the other spouse receive any money from that pension? Likely answer is no. Joint pay, the likely answer is yes. And I say likely because there's nuances in every plan, but be aware of that, because if we don't ask that, then our client may not be aware that their income's about to stop upon the death of the other spouse. A lot of complex retirement plans, as I mentioned earlier, and I mentioned RSUs and deferred compensation because they're the most common. So those are particularly types of assets that are received by the CEO or the very highly compensated employee. Sometimes you've probably heard them called top hat compensation. They're ones that are very detailed. They have very complex terms, and they may or may not be able to be received by the other spouse. Deferred compensation, this is just a deferral of compensation, exactly what it sounds like. This particular asset may or may not be able to receive by the other spouse if the divorce takes place prior to it being paid out. You'll need documents, you'll need discovery to understand the terms of that deferred compensation. RSUs are called restricted stock units. Depending on the type of industry, depending on this type of unit, you may have actually just received it in an account. They may have not actually even assumed it yet. They may be able to see it on a tax return, but likely it's going to be something that's been that over time they're going to see what the asset is actually going to be valued at. And they may not have actually been able to actually own and receive this asset prior to the divorce. And more of a top level, something to be aware of that those exist. The other thing when talking about complex retirement plans is there's a lot of, we know, economic conditions. The market changes, especially right now. It's all over the place. It changes. We need to be aware as practitioners to have the discussion with our clients about what will happen in market volatility as we look at this asset today. If it's worth $250 and we're dividing it, and you have a document that goes in that says we're splitting it 125 and 125, what happens if it goes up? Did that spouse lose part of that asset? The answer would be yes, if it's written that way. If it goes down, then one party actually is receiving more of an asset than they would have. So it's a bittersweet. So the discussion to have with clients on any retirement asset is, do we want to discuss gains and losses upon division, or do we want an actual amount? Each party is different, each is going to be different, and typically judges award gains and losses. So untangling of assets, I mentioned earlier, in the business realm. That's going to be the biggest area in the gray divorce that we are needed if you are in the financial industry. If you're in other industries such as real estate, home mortgage realm, and counsel realm, know that this is something we're seeing on the financial side that we get brought into, and a lot of these are overlooked because the clients themselves don't understand the asset, or they don't really understand what happened in the family business and how they got into it. They're just running the business. They're just a worker bee. They don't even know. So it's our job to untangle. They might even be articulating to their legal counsel or anyone that they know, their CPA, their financial advisor, or anyone else they're talking to, of what they think happened over the years. But those of us that are with a different keen eye and a different skill set, we need to be able to untangle it so that we can show the courts the asset value for each individual asset. Health insurance coverage, this is neglected all the time, is even being brought up during the course of a divorce and at the very end. No one is thinking about how they're going to pay their health insurance and where it's going to come from. Sometimes this is negotiated. Sometimes if someone's retiring, there might be a benefit to the ex-spouse of health insurance under certain conditions. Military is one that's already put in stone per se and in play depending on how long they've been married and how long the person was actually part of the military. Other companies may have something for the ex-spouse. Just note that the open-ended support payments in this generation will not be there, or they're going to be ending based on the modification that we had talked about earlier. Largest concerns of this generation, either they're going to tell you about and not really be able to articulate it, or they're not even going to be aware that they're happening. The biggest is going to be the risk of outliving assets. We all talk about it. We hear people talk about it all the time, is nobody ever wants to run out of money. And then when I do a financial plan for someone, we're talking about the risk of running outside of money. If I have two individuals that are married, so once these assets are divided, the chance of running out of money is obviously mathematically much greater. They don't have the ability for higher earnings. They don't have the ability, like we said earlier, to replenish that money, especially if someone's been a homemaker. Because statistically, 1/3 of the women after divorce feel their quality of life have went down. So we as practitioners either didn't have the discussions of the expectation or due diligence looking at the assets, or on the other side of things, there wasn't enough to go around and nobody informed them that this is back to the expectation. After those that are divorced and the proceedings are done and the assets are divided, most couples do not even consider how they're going to replenish an emergency savings because they've typically emergency savings to pay for the divorce. The husband, if he's still working, likely can replenish it. The wife, more likely, will not. Her emergency savings becomes the 401k. It becomes the IRA, which is not a good answer. So as practitioners, we just need to be able to talk with them about what are you going to do in an emergency situation after the divorce to have assets to rely on, to tap into, to pay your, just more of a discussion point. We need to be discussing the cost for health care with them. They likely haven't considered it. They haven't run a number. They likely are used to the group benefits running through the husband's payroll, and they never even saw the amount. We need to be bringing those things up. We need to discuss the effect of Social Security. So Social Security has their own rules. If someone's been married for more than 10 years, they are able to receive half of their spouse's benefit or their own, whichever's more. Ex-spouse's benefit. What most retirees will neglect to do is look and see what was the other half of their ex-spouse versus their own when they get to Social Security. So it's an education standard. If a spouse is claiming on half of their ex-spouse, doesn't affect the other spouse, they still get their full benefit. Doesn't touch it at all. But we're talking with our clients about Social Security, how the rules work, and what they're entitled to. The other is to make sure they keep their spouse's Social Security number because that's what they're going to need when they apply. That's often overlooked because most people shred all their documents after the divorce. Security claim comes around 5 years later, and they don't know how to obtain that Social Security. Older women are more at risk than any other age group and out of both genders when we're dealing with the gray divorce. This particular group, they're going to be in poverty. If actually 60% of women that end up on a claim of Social Security and end up in the gray divorce become part of actual poverty levels. So as a practitioner, as the last final takeaway of these are the strategies and resolutions where we can help in the gray divorce with all the aspects we just talked about. One is going to be the division of property. We all know, depending on if you're a community property state or it's an equitable state, there's various rules that are out there. As practitioners, we need to first decide and assist on all the assets that are out there, decide their value, determine who actually owns them, determine if they're marital, non-marital, and of course being inheritance or maybe even something of a. We need to determine that and start pulling that apart first. After that, we can determine vision of the asset. What makes most sense? What does someone need? as they've saved out of this nest egg for all these years, and now we're dividing it, now their impact of their financial retirement is just significant, right? If we don't have those taxes need to be considered in the division. Practitioners were able to help assist and determine potential tax impact of what they're dividing. From an income standpoint, we're going to be able to see with their prior expenses, after we've examined what their lifestyle has been like, how are we going to fund that lifestyle? What's going to pay for those expenses? Going to be Social Security, pension, or are we going to have to drain from an asset and actually take it to zero? What is that going to look like for them? Clients need to know how they're going to pay their bills. They're going through an emotional process and they're not thinking about that. That's our job. And with that, we do something called a lifestyle analysis, where we look back at the parties' credit cards, their bank statements, and determine what was the lifestyle leading up to the date of divorce, leading up to the separation, physical or just a mental separation where they've decided it's time for the divorce. What did that look like? Was it a lifestyle funded by debt, or was there income available? There we can help decide what type of support would one party be able to pay, and what would one party need based on that lifestyle. Is it going to be enough to go around? That will help set those expectations. One phenomenon, or really one trend I'm seeing pre-divorce, is they like mediation. Those three things right there, the division of property, the income replacement, and lifestyle analysis, is all or part of what I have been assisting with the gray divorce parties determine. Prior to COVID-19, a lot of people argued a lot in court. They still do. But not every case needs to go to court. Only about 3% of them do. I've seen that percentage go down since March 2020. Got used to Zoom meetings, got used to hearings over the phone and on our computer. Now, parties realize they don't have to fight it out. There are ways that they can communicate with someone like myself or other practitioners or even one or two attorneys to be able to negotiate not having to spend as much for divorce. But that trend has been accelerating since 2020. Business owner succession. Finding that, as we talked about earlier, the multi-generational business, no one is discussing what will happen in that business upon divorce. Sometimes whoever's been working there will continue to work there. Other times they're selling their shares during the divorce time period or shortly thereafter. That discussion needs to be had of what is going on, what has happened, how did they get there, and what is the intent going forward. And financial planning, no matter if you're the husband or the wife, they really need to understand what did they receive in the divorce, how does that impact them from a short and a long-term perspective. Are there any type of things they can tweak, they can do, they can change to be able to enhance their financial lifestyle and enhance their retirement, knowing that they don't have the opportunity to create additional assets or income based on their age group. Open it up to any questions.
Questions. Thank you, Michelle. That was so chock full and wonderful presentation. I was getting messages. Do you want to stop sharing so we can just see some? I can't see if people are raising their hands. And while we're doing that, if people want to put their business information or your contact information in the chat, please do that. I see some people already did that, and you can save the chat by going to the chat box, clicking on the three dots, and you can save the chat. You know, we do these presentations, of course, for the education, how that's a very important part of the NADP, but it's also to bring our members together, to network with one another, meet one another. So after the Q&A, we will break up into little groups, and you guys can do some virtual networking and meet one another. But let's open it up. Questions for Michele before she leaves us. Yes, Irina.
I went through divorce myself, and we own 2 businesses. And so my question is the only way to divide the businesses as after evaluating both businesses and how much it costs? I mean, it costs us a lot. Are there any other ways?
That's a super question. I get that a lot. And I'll say from a 30,000-foot view, if I have a business owner, first I want to see, is the business worth the paper it's printed on? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the business owner has a job. Sometimes it's a sellable business. That's kind of the first thing, is what kind of revenue is coming in, what type of expenses are out there, and what's the bottom line. That's the first thing I look at. Also look at the hierarchy of the business. Are there just husband and wife? Is it just husband and an assistant? Or do we have a hierarchy of 5, 7, 10 people within the business? So that's my first thing that I'll do, is I'll look at that first. Then I'll drill down to see, what are the expenses inside? Are they necessary to run the business? Or is the business owner pillaging it like a piggy bank, and that's their compensation? Which is, again, a whole other conversation how that works. Is it compensation? Then I'll drill down to that bottom line. Is it going to be worth spending the money for evaluation, which could be anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000, depending on the complexity, the records, what you're looking at. Also depending on jurisdiction, because I see you're North Carolina. I know your cost of living in that direction.
30,000.
Oh, okay. I saw it in Raleigh. So depending, again, on the area, it could actually even be more or less depending on that. So that being said, it depends. What does it look like? And if it looks like it's a business that actually is generating income, is it a business that's easily transferable, or an industry that's transferable where someone could take it over? Or is it going to be something that you just had a job, you had flexibility, and you got a lot of benefits out of the revenue coming in?
Yeah, so, and also hidden income, because like in one of the businesses, that my spouse was taking constantly the loans and living off of the loans instead of the income, and just paying off the loans. So that was very interesting structure I did not know about when I was married.
Yes, and that's actually my favorite part, because forensics are probably my favorite thing to do, ultimately, is I like to go find the hidden money, the hidden income. So when I'm doing a business valuation, kind of as a offshoot to that, I'm looking at how money is spent. Where did it go? How did it come in? And again, loans to shareholder or actually loans to the bank, I'm always looking at what's funding it. And usually that leads to some type of forensic or tracing. So I'm usually hired maybe for one or the other, maybe as a valuation or to do forensics. And I'll start seeing things from a lot of different avenues once you start digging into the general ledger or the business books and finding, how does the business owner really run the business?
Right. Well, it's good if they provide you the documents, because he would not provide the documents. And the courts are so busy, you have to wait for so long, took 4.5 years to divorce.
Yes, that's why mediation has just really just boomed across
Walk
the board.
Walk away from 2 mediations. She just walked away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That was his attorney's advice. Just to walk away, didn't provide any documents.
I'm not sure that attorney's on the up and up, but I don't know if I'd want to work with an attorney like that.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, doesn't always work for everybody. And, luckily litigation is there if you have to. And sometimes there only takes one party to blow up a mediation. So, well, we're at the top of the hour. So I think we'll pause here. Thank you
Hey,
so
Nicole,
much.
I have a question.
Okay, let's make it a short one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask her, as a financial planner, why she doesn't use reverse mortgages in her planning.
I have. It depends on the situation and the client.
But why do you say it depends on the situation? I don't understand that.
Well, in my opinion, a reverse mortgage may or may not be suitable for everyone. It's going to depend on the situation, the client. What are we looking for? What are we looking to do? How much money do you need? I feel like, and there's other planning aspects that may come into play, but definitely there's a place for it.
I mean, that could be a topic in itself to talk about what reverse mortgage is, and maybe we can talk about that, because I think a lot of people, don't understand exactly what the benefits and risks are involved. So Gwendolyn, we could talk about that as a monthly recurring thing. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, so we are going to now, well, just a couple of things I'm going to put in the chat. The CDS code for anyone that has taken our certified divorce specialist training. I'm giving you the CE code. It's 1017, so 1017 member CE. So that is the code for anybody that's going to be hearing the recording. Thank you so much again, Michele. Great presentation. So thank you so much. Any last closing? Look like you want to say something.
I was going to say it was great being here, and again, hopefully I tried not to go too deep into things, but I mean, there's so many subject offshoots I could have done. If there's any questions you have, please feel free to contact me. I think the slides are out there with contact information. I'm happy to answer or assist in any way I can.
Thank you. Yeah, we will upload this recording by tomorrow with Michele's contact information. So wonderful. So Michele, can you stay with us and go into a breakout room, do a little virtual networking? Great. So Cybele, as soon as you are ready, and I'm going to stay in the main room with our guests to answer any questions they may have, and everybody else go introduce one another. And usually we do like a little brief intro. So maybe just say, in addition to who you are, what you do, where you live, any special things you have planned for the holidays, share that. Okay. And we'll see you. Hopefully you'll be joining me for the marketing workshop on Thursday or next month at our next monthly member meeting. Bye.